Hello and welcome everybody to Turn It Up. How are you all? Afternoon slumped or afternoon pumped to hear from our next amazing friend of Kapia. My name is Alicia. I'm the Operations and Impact Manager here at Kapia and the host of our next talk, Diversity is More Than Demographics. Before I introduce our presenter, I would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Now, of course, we are connecting today from different places. I'm joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respect to them, their culture, their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to pay my respect to the traditional owners on the land on which you all sit. So while we wait for a few more people to join us, and seeing as we're all probably a little bit Zoom and COVID fatigued, I thought we could try a simple and quick technique to help evoke some energy and get rid of some toxic air. It's called breath of fire. Now, any yogis with us will probably be familiar with this technique, so I'll acknowledge now that this is a very abridged but hopefully slightly more fun version that we'll be doing today. A quick warning though, this practice is not recommended for anyone that is pregnant, has a respiratory infection, high blood pressure, or experiences vertigo. So please just watch and do this vicariously through the people you can see on your screen. And don't worry, you'll have the opportunity to be part of the last round of this exercise though. So the way this works is that your breaths are short, shallow, and quick. And you only breathe in and out through your nose if you can. But if you can't, just do it through your mouth and it will get the same effect. So at the same time, you'll activate your abdominal muscles, squeezing them in with each exhale. Don't worry about the inhale, that will come naturally on its own. Just focus on the exhales, a little bit like this. So if at any point you feel lightheaded or otherwise uncomfortable, please stop and just breathe normally. So let's try this for 5 easy breaths. Are you ready? And go. Great. How do we go? Just breathe normally for a few breaths. We're going to do it again for a little bit faster for 10 breaths, and then we'll take a rest. Are you ready? And breathe. Okay, take a deep breath. Go back to breathing normally. I don't know about you, but I can already feel my heart rate increasing a little bit. Okay, now for our last round, we're going to do 20 breaths. And this time I'd like you to throw in some funny faces just for a laugh. Are you ready? And go. Okay, just relax, take a deep breath. Go back to breathing normally. Maybe grab a drink of water, keep you hydrated for the rest of the session. How did you all go with that? Okay. This technique is usually practiced for a couple of minutes, but I think we'll leave it there for today. So a little bit of housekeeping. I'm sure many of you are experienced Zoom users by now, but I'd just like to remind you of some etiquette as well as a few other things that will be happening during the session. This session is being recorded, so if anyone doesn't want their funny face to be exposed, please send me a private message in the chat and I will happily replace yours with the caricature of my choice. For anyone who would like a copy of the recording, all you need to do is sign up for our newsletter. The link will be posted in the chat and will pop up on your screen shortly. I'd also like to ask you all to ensure your microphones are on mute for the session so that we don't have any background sounds interfering with the presentation. I suggest you pop your view into speaker mode so you can see who's speaking at any time, because you won't be able to fit everybody in the session on your screen. And if you have any resources that you'd like to share throughout the session, feel free to pop them in the chat as well. And any questions that you have for Lisa, pop them in the chat as well, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Lastly, if you would like to network with other people in this afternoon session, please head on over to our conference page on Facebook. There you can share your thoughts and ideas from the conference and keep the conversation going. So we'll pop that link into the chat as well. Now, I shall introduce Lisa for you. Having worked in local government in planning, economic development, events, community development and social planning, Lisa understands the immense value of authentic community engagement, effective communication and building trust and partnerships with the community along the way. She is committed professionally and personally to achieving outcomes which make a difference. So now I will hand it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much to Kapir for inviting me to be part of the Turn It Up conference this week. It's exciting to have so many friendly faces. It's been so rare to see so many people together in one place, even if it is virtually. So before I share my ideas, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I live and work, the Peak Wurrung people of the Maar Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the tradition and knowledge of their community. It has a real impact in our region. So today I'm just going to chat a bit about the conversation or the proposition that diversity is more than demographics. For me, this is an idea that's come together as a slow build. It's layered up over time, over my work experiences and my life experiences. I've always felt a bit uncomfortable categorising people by the facts about them. I've always felt it sells people short, perpetuates stereotyping and poses a risk for our engagement processes and the results that they can possibly achieve. So today I'm going to talk you through my thoughts on this, how I've come to this conclusion, and what I perhaps suggest the fix might be in the future, or how you can think about that moving forward. So to begin, let's look at some demographics in the eyes of the all-powerful ABS. So I'm not going to talk over this. This is only 1 minute and 50, so sit back and just relax.
The census numbers are in Australia, revealing who we are, what we do, how we work, and how we live. In the past 5 years, we've grown by about 1.9 million people to 23.4 million of us on census night. That's 1,037 more of us every day since the 2011 census, bringing our official population count to 24.4 million. But where do we live in this beautiful wide brown land of ours? 8 in 10 of us live in the eastern mainland states and territories. Though over 2 million of us live in a single-person household, there's more than 6 million families, the majority being couples with children. Although single dads are on the rise, Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander peoples now make up 2.8% of our total population. That's over 600,000 people. Our median age is 38, so we're living longer too. In fact, almost 470,000 of us are now aged 85 or over. Since 2011, the average income has jumped by over $100 per week. While young people leave their faith as they grow up, Australia remains a religious country, with 60% of the population reporting a religious belief. And when it comes to diversity, with about 200 countries of birth, over 300 languages, over 100 religions throughout our communities, and more than 26% of us born overseas, we're a nation of nations. Find out more about who we are at abs.gov.au.
So, is this all we need to know about people to plan and deliver effective, inclusive community engagement? Most of us use the demographics of a community to set targets for our engagement, so we reach those people we need to and evaluate our outcomes. A demographic profile gives us a baseline. It gives us something to measure our results against. a way to illustrate the diversity of voices in our sample and show us if we've achieved a decent representation of the community we're working with. But as the ABS video shows, demographics can provide great detail about who we are, their facts about us, in overwhelming levels of detail. But it doesn't give us any insights into people's hearts and minds, their values, what they believe, who they trust to provide information, or how we can best reach them. For me, in that picture of Australia, there's something really missing. Does the census tell us who we really are? So, relying on demographics presumes that people who are demographically similar may represent that cohort. It's a risk that by engaging people in particular group, young, old, female, male, that you've ticked a box, that you've achieved a reflective, if not representative, sample of your community. But is it really the case? Certainly anyone who's watched Sex and the City knows that while the four main characters were all single, were all about the same age, were all professional women who lived in New York, that was about their only similarities that they shared. Same can be said for all the stock photos on the screen. They're all similar demographically, but is it really the whole story? In community engagement practice, I've found that the demographic measures are regularly used as a proxy for diversity. We've all done it. We all do it. I still do it. But sometimes it's the only data available for us to segment the community. But does that make it right? Does it make it good practice? We are all so much more than the facts about ourselves that the census can share. Our age, our gender, our ability, our cultural background, and our incomes are only a really small part of the picture. I don't dismiss that we can tell a great deal about people by looking at their demographics, but by themselves, this data is really limiting and presents risks to your processes. It risks generalisations and stereotypes and makes us feel like there might be such a thing as typical or normal. A typical young person, a typical older person. Demographic data tells us nothing about people's aspirations, their beliefs, their attitudes, or their experiences that might have shaped them, and their friends and their families. These things affect their trust in councils, government and authorities, your clients, their beliefs, who they're likely to listen to, and the influences over their lives. Demographics don't help us understand how and where to best present information to increase the likelihood of engagement. Diversity of thought and what's in people's hearts and minds is far more powerful and useful than the demographic facts. And so I thought the very best way to show you how I came to think about it this way, that diversity is much, much more than demographics. I want to tell you a little bit about my story and my career trajectory. I haven't always been a community engagement practitioner. I don't necessarily call myself one now. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my career and the sort of reflection on what I learned in those periods of my working life that really got me believing that diversity is far more than demographics. So I started out in the very early 90s, trained in urban planning and design at RMIT a long time ago. In fact, I finished my degree in 1991, so I'll let you do the maths about that. I started my career in local government as a town planner. My job was to make sure that people who were affected by a project knew about it and had an opportunity to have a say, either by making a submission or objecting to a proposal in most cases. This was a really formal and highly regulated process, still is. The Planning Act controls how many days you've got to submit and how it can be considered and whether you're truly affected. When I moved into strategic planning, real community engagement opened up before me. Remember, this was the 90s. There was lots of community planning forums, people really excited about a new way of listening to and thinking about community involvement in their processes. How many of you remember charrettes? I'm sure there's a few people of my vintage and older that adopted some of the processes that were coming out of particularly Canada and the States at that time. Community-led design and real engagement were just emerging in local government, and it was pretty exciting times. It was really changing. We heard a lot from people during those community processes, but on reflection, looking back, Did we really listen? Not so sure. Did we sometimes judge them? Absolutely. The concept of us and them weighed heavily on me, and planners of all types at that time generally thought they knew what was best for communities, just like councils thought they knew what was best for communities. It really was a decade marked by sometimes tokenistic community engagement practices. I didn't think that at the time, but certainly looking back, I have a few question marks over some of the ways we approach this. So later in the 90s, my career was more driven by money. I moved into local, not money for me, but money for my clients and for my employers and my community. I moved into local economic development and tourism, and it was my job to understand and engage key target markets, to drive visitors, increase yield, get people to spend money. With this shift in work, I pivoted to really engaging people in terms of their consumption and spending patterns, and that's when I really started to understand people a bit more. We started using the tools developed by advertising and the marketing sector, and I quickly began to understand more about what motivates people, their lifestyles, their beliefs and their values, and how that affects their decisions around spending money and their behaviours when they're a visitor or an event goer. You would have already heard about Roy Morgan Research. They've done a lot of work in this space. They're interested in people as consumers. They sell information to advertising agencies and marketers, so products and services can be targeted to get the most effective outcome possible. This is when I really began to understand that one proposition, one messenger, one set of messages, or a single communication channel was never going to be successful in achieving the outcomes that you needed to get people to do what you wanted them to do. And this was a really focusing time. When you're responsible for sales outcomes, the success of a tourism destination, driving local spending or selling tickets to an event, you become highly motivated to understand your market and really unpack people, what they want and how to present the product that you're selling in a way that they're most likely to consider. The data you need to do this goes way beyond demographics. Person's age or cultural background doesn't let you into their hearts and minds. It doesn't let you understand their persona or the decisions that they're likely to make. So after I worked in economic development and tourism for a while, I joined an events team with Warrnambool City Council, and I was part of an amazing team of people, some of the best operators I've ever seen, who were responsible for the Fun for Kids Festival. It was awarded Australia's best community festival in the mid-2000s, and it was 8 days and 2.5 acres of fun. It was amazing. It was the hardest job I've ever done, but still the best job. And the most important thing to us about this major event was understanding our target audience. It was critical to nailing our outcomes and our targets every year. We relied on the psychographics from Roy Morgan Research to identify who were our most likely visitors, design the program specifically for them, and then market the hell out of it. We weren't ever going to make budget if we didn't. So understanding our stakeholders, our potential market, was critical to the success that what we did every day. And that's influenced me every day in my work ever since. So before I tell you about what my next step was in my career about community planning and the additional learning that came from working in health and wellbeing, you might be wondering a little bit about the menu on the other side of the road. And it was the other side of the road. So all of the time that I was working in local government, first 10 years of my career, I was also waiting tables in the cafe that my husband and I owned. And this presented some of the best insights about people that I've ever had or will ever had. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have worked in bars and waited tables, and that's where you really get to know people, is in hospitality. It's a real opportunity to watch and learn. And it's certainly not their age or gender, wealth or education or their tastes in food that makes it interesting, but learning who they are and why they are, their life experiences, their willingness to change, and what or who influences their decision-making and their behaviour is critical. You become a really good waitress by trying to preempt what someone wants. So let me explain in a nutshell what it means to be a waitress and try and pick the social type of people through who walks in your door. So while waiting tables, I learned a heap about our customers. You could tell what a person was about, their lived experiences, who they were exposed to, and what they, everything about them really, by their decisions on the menu, but particularly their hot drinks. Their hot drinks in the 90s, and I'm sorry, this is embarrassing, but remember, this was the 90s and it was the country. Some people did prefer instant coffee. So these are the 4 groups that, I can highlight from my days in our cafe. In the early 90s, there were still people that ordered an instant coffee. They had basic tastes and needs. Probably they hadn't left Warrnambool much or often at all, and they weren't influenced by fashions in food or fashions in any way. They used to say, I'll have my coffee the old way. They didn't like change. They liked it how it was. That's what they drank at home. When they went out, they wanted the same thing. People who drank tea, especially those that drank tea with milk, they don't like change at all. They haven't really warmed to coffee, and they've been drinking tea just like their grandparents did, in a pot with milk for generations. And this applies to 20-year-olds and 70-year-olds. Chances are they were not moving far from the norm. It definitely wasn't an age thing. And look, in the 90s, there was only 2 or 3 coffee machines in Warrnambool, and that's true. Proper espresso was few and far between, and someone who ordered a cappuccino was pretty trendy. Up with the trends. They travelled at least as far as Melbourne. Carlton, Lygon Street at the time was the place for coffee and for Italian food, and that's what people equated it with. These people were up with the trends and they were open to change. It wasn't an age or gender thing. It was who they'd been influenced by, who they listened to, and what their life experiences were about. And the decaf soy latte person, they're potentially still similar people today. They were the hipsters of the 90s. They were concerned about nutrition and health, and they connected with the wider world and open to change. So those 4 groups of people, it was not about their age. It was not about their gender. It was not about what part of Warrnambool they lived in. They could have been on a farm, or they could have lived in an apartment up the street. I could still tell you their coffee preference related exactly to the type of person that they were, the decisions that they would make in their life. And those insights into the things that influence people about their food choices were telling. It told me a lot more than they realised about what was going on for them, who they were. So bringing it back to community engagement, what does that all mean? If demographics is not enough, if we need more insights, what does that mean and what does that look like? And I really equate that back, I will go back to my right slide. I equate that to, the hard to reach message. Demographically, some people are hard to reach. I don't like using hard to reach as a term, because maximising participation and focusing the efforts on the possible to reach is what we all need to be doing. Some people will be impossible to reach. They'll be impossible to reach at the end of the spectrum, because they might be in crisis or in some other situation that we can't preempt. And chances are we don't need to talk to them anyway. If they're in that state, they're probably not in a position to be involved or participate in a community process. Or they might just be socially isolated, living alone, not connected to services, and fairly disconnected. There's a lot of people like that in every community, and those hard to reach, you may just never reach. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got easy to reach people. You've got those highly interested people, the hyper engaged in community. They're well connected. They participate in every survey. They possibly watch council meetings streamed online, and people have been loving that this year in this COVID new normal, where they can actually not only read the paper or check out what's going on, but actually watch what's going on at a community level. Those easy to reach, we hear from them all the time, and I would consider those people are the people that are in my bubble. But demographics doesn't let you work out where people sit on that spectrum. And my recommendation to everybody is that it's really, really important to focus on the possible to reach. These people can be reached when you're guided by sociographic profiling. If you use the right language, not simply plain English, I'm not talking about the words you write, but the way you write them, your pitch to interest them, how to press their buttons, to understand them fully, what drives them, what they care most about, and who is the best messenger for that information. Who's the spokesperson that you need out in front of your project? This is exactly why brands use influencers and pay for sponsorships for sporting people and celebrities. Who is out in front of your message is critical to getting people engaged and participating in your processes. And the other aspect that sociographic data gives you is people's level of trust in authority and government. And this is really goes back to that spokesperson for your project or your issue. If you don't have the right person out in front and they don't trust the organisation that's putting out the message, you won't be able to present it in a way that's likely to resonate. It won't land with people. So I've got two examples where we missed the mark in terms of community engagement and communications in my previous working life. And just to show you that had I had an insight, a better insight into our community, these things may not have happened, or potentially they would have, but we would have known going in that that challenge existed. So the first of those two examples that I'd like to share with you was a pub in Warrnambool called Rafferty's Tavern, which wanted to add gaming machines into its development, and the gaming machines were integral to the redevelopment and refurbing that pub from something that was pretty ordinary and tacky in a really disadvantaged and vulnerable part of town into something that people would be proud of, would like to go to. And council in the about 2012 decided that because the evidence was there, because the demographics were vulnerable, that they should fight it. They really should fight it. It's in the best interests of the community. It's for the greater good, and we should do that. And so without thinking about those people that wanted this new pub, without thinking about those people as individuals with rights and expectations, I think council was happy to jump to the us and them dilemma of us being right, us understanding that gaming can be damaging for some people in the community, and that for the greater good, we should try and ensure that that didn't happen. And by not actually thinking about those people and their own particular personalities, their level of engagement with evidence and science and current trends, and understanding the impacts of gaming, they just saw council taking away a new pub. They just wanted a new pub. And so the pushback was incredible. So, you know, for some of us, it was an incredible revelation that we could have got it so wrong. And the reason we got it so wrong, and that the community wasn't tucked right back in behind us, like the community of Castlemaine and the community of Monash, was that we had misjudged the community completely. And that's because we'd used demographics. We had used income levels and levels of unemployment and all sorts of other measures to determine what was right for that community, without listening well and without really understanding the problem that we faced in pursuing a policy outcome that we thought or we understood to be best for the community, but was definitely not right for the communities involved. So that was the first example. The second example is a really recent example that I've seen happen in a local council, where because of some challenges that council was facing, the current chief executive limited all communications coming out of that council to be either coming through the mayor as spokesperson or the chief executive. In the period that policy was in place, I saw the trust erode in that council for that community really rapidly and really significantly. All of a sudden, you went from a community that listened to different council officers or different small business owners or sports people about policy issues and about social issues that were going on, to really switching off and actually really starting to judge the messaging and question the messaging that was coming out of council. It had always been council's messaging all along, but in previous times we had used lots of different council officers or people in the community to lead campaigns and put forward ideas and encourage people to participate in engagement processes. As soon as that stopped, almost immediately, there was immediate disengagement, and there was a number of people in the community who completely really turned off all messaging from council. So it was really clear to me that in those two circumstances, had the people making those decisions had a better insight into the people that they were trying to communicate with or engage in processes, they wouldn't have made those decisions. And to me, it's data, specifically sociographic data and sociographic profiling for LGAs, that may provide this sort of insight that we could all utilise as something in our toolboxes to really unpack people's values and attitudes and break down the us and them. So I'd like to show you now an example of this sociographic profiling and give you a little bit of a sense of what that is in terms of what it looks like, what sort of reporting is available, and what it might mean for your processes. So sociographic profiling is based on ABS census data. So it doesn't completely diminish the need for demographic data, it adds to it. Demographic data is added to by additional sources, market research and social data, and it's engineered using algorithms that have been developed over decades to develop these profiles to give you an insight into local communities, how they think and act. They're available at an LGA and a neighbourhood level. So the map you'll see shortly, you'll be able to see differences in small areas. And there's 4 key social profiles that have been developed. And they represent the local population. Many of these profiles are struck at a national level or a state level. So if you look at Helix Persona or some of the other bigger psychographic profiles, they're struck relative to the nation as a whole, which means at a local area, you might have a really skewed result. For example, in a conservative rural area or regional area, you may have no sort of progressive groups. Whereas this sociographic profiling is done specifically for that local community. So we've developed these profiles for this local government area, and this is the first one that's been tested. So our first profile has provided really great insights for our leading regional council, who has put their hand up and said, yes, we'd like to give this a try. So the sociographic profile clearly showed that residents of this area have a really large focus on prior experience with employment and family. Their experiences drive 3/4 of the population's day-to-day decisions. They are really looking back and really focusing on their experiences to date rather than looking forward. They have a general tendency towards maintaining their traditional ways of life, think pots of tea, although there are some pockets who are more comfortable with change and the risk-taking that's starting to show up in new cohorts in that community. New ideas and changes through the profile will be seen at first as a threat to people's freedom and independence. Change put forward without context will be really blocked, according to the profiling. The profile finds that residents really focus on the present. So talk about the future, as I said, needs to be grounded in practical and immediate benefits that they understand. So that's the overall oversight of what Warrnambool looks like in terms of that sociographic profile, but let's unpack it one layer down and look at the 4 groupings. So what we have is 4 particular groups, and the whole community fits into those 4 groupings. They're almost like tribes. They're independent families, the simple living group, the carefully progressive group, and the traditionalists, the traditional life group. And what the sociographic profile provides is the message, how you can engage their interest. And this is just a summary. It unpacks, and I'll show you in a moment how it really unpacks in incredible detail, where you can reach them best, and the proportion of the households in that city or town where that are in each group. So for Warrnambool, independent families are about 1/4 of the population. These people are real independent thinkers, and they don't have a high level of trust of any level of government or authority. Simple living, tell me how it makes my life simpler, would be the motto you'd need to use in trying to communicate with them. And they have very traditional ways of communication through the post, television, and local community and local newspapers. And more than 1/3 of that community are in that simple living group. The carefully progressive group are, I think, probably most of the people on this call today. These are people who believe in evidence and science and think quite deeply on issues. They like to decide, but they will weigh up all the pros and cons, do their research, read, think deeply, and rely on trusted experts. They read major newspapers. They are online in their looking at social issues, and they don't mind something in the mail. And in Warrnambool, that's about 1/4 of all households. And the traditional life group is a smaller group in Warrnambool, and it's really about, they're bedding down, they're protecting their current lifestyle. They don't really want anything to change. Traditionalists are traditionalists. They really want things as they are. And again, they like more traditional channels. So as a way of sort of showing you how these work in terms of a profile itself, I've got the example of the Simple Living report for Warrnambool over the next couple of pages. So I'll just give you a quick look and speak to a couple of aspects of it before we move to some questions. And I'd love to hear from you about what you think about the sociographic information rather than demographic information. So the Simple Living group in Warrnambool, and if any of you are on the Zoom from Warrnambool in the southwest region, just by looking at this map, you will probably have a reasonable sense of who these people are. They want to know how their life can be more simple. They're focused on that as a key value, and they're all about meeting their basic needs. I think about them as, it's not just about income, but it's a really simple life where they really are not aspiring to a lot, and they're really focused on their day-to-day earnings and requirements. So the sociographic profile gives you a summary, which is what is in the grey box, tells you more about the policies that they're likely to care about most, the issues that they may want to engage with council, government or authorities on, what drives them, what's really going on for them, what are the things they like to do, what's important to them. And one thing that really jumps out at me for this is I'm more interested in my job than my house. And I know when I was working at Warrnambool for a long time, many people would judge many of the neighbourhoods that are highlighted in red in that map and say, why don't they just cut their lawn? And they really didn't understand what people that were working hard week to week to earn the money, that they didn't have any extra, they didn't have any time to focus on, the discretionary things in life. And it was a real judgment point. But really, it's just a value and an attitude and a life experience that might mean that that's not the most important thing to you. So that was one that really jumped out for me, and that really resonated in terms of the areas of the city that I'm really familiar with. So the Simple Living really accords with some big tracts of social housing and some areas of lower CFA and evolving areas that are transitioning at the moment that are more central, but certainly big tracts of people that have probably lived in the same area forever, and they're sort of entry-level properties that they're renting or that they are buying. So that's sort of the summary about simple living as a category. What the next page of the report shows us is the best way to engage and reach them. So we're not talking about a cohort like young people here, like older people, and categorising everybody into a demographic stereotype, but into a values, attitudes and beliefs grouping. And so this is a really important guide on how and where to reach them. The voice style and tone part of the report teaches you how to communicate and where to communicate, and who to use as the influencer, who should be the project front person, who should be out in the community talking about it. It provides tips on how to engage them. So in the how to engage me section, people in this category really would value testimonials and expert opinion, and not just hearing from the local councillors or the local politician about what is best for them. They do like to unpack these things. We've talked a little bit from the previous slide about the channels that are best to reach simple living, but definitely directly by post or email, advertising on TV, and the local newspaper is really critical. It's good to know what is going to send them running for the hills. You know, I've often made the mistake of going somewhere down a path of sharing something about a project that just makes them go, well, that's not for me, not of interest to me, not relevant to me, whatever reason. But just triggering them in a way that means, no, I'm not going to participate in your process, I'm not interested in this issue, is really critical to know to maximise that participation, as are the hot buttons. What are the positives? You know, the turn-offs are the absolute barriers to people engaging in your process, but the hot buttons are the things that you can do in your communications and in your design of your engagement processes to make it most interesting and make them most curious about what it is that you would like them to be part of. And probably the one thing that really is critical is what's the benefit, what's the win-win, what's the proposition that you need to put forward to this particular group. And it's all about short term, and it's all about their friends. So they would be more likely to be engaged if it's not a long-term commitment. You know, 12 months of deliberative process is not for them. A chat at a market might be more likely. So, you know, that benefit proposition is really critical to know if you're going to maximise. You think of that span of the easy to reach at one end and the hard to reach at the other, and that massive bell curve of people in yellow who are possible to reach, but you may not be able to if you use normal cohorts and segmentation and processes, or just business as usual processes. Focusing on those benefit propositions and really thinking about how you target those people is critical. What I always think about is what would get people over the line to participate? What are the benefits that you need to offer them? What are the temptations? What are the interest points that you can tease out of your communications or the way in which you speak to people that might make them go, yeah, I'm actually interested enough to be part of this, because that's half the battle with engagement. The tools are only as good as getting people to the starting gate, if you like. If you can't even get them there, then diversity in your sample will never be achieved. So as a quick snapshot, it's really difficult to take you through this in a way that will make it really hit home. So what I wanted to do was really share myself as the persona that you're looking at. So what I did was picked out a few of the demographic profiles that I would describe as me. And what I did was take the Warrnambool report and have a look at the neighbourhood where I live. And what it said was I was carefully progressive. That didn't surprise me one little bit. But if you contrast the description of the facts about me in the left column to the description of me and my neighbours on the right-hand side, you are getting two completely different sets of insights. You can be female, 40 to 49 with kids and buying your house and working full time and be a range of different things. That doesn't tell me very much about the person at all. But the sociographic profile, the description that's there as a carefully progressive person based on, you know, the characteristics of my neighbourhood is pretty bang on. And anyone that's on the Zoom that knows me would think that I wrote that about myself. I didn't. Someone in Sydney wrote that based on what they know, the social observations, the market testing, the focus groups, and the census data that they know and they've tested over years as to what are the elements or personalities of a community based on demographics and the social data that we have. And so, you know, you've got a bit of an insight of me there. That's me, in fact, on the left-hand side, and it's me, my culture, my beliefs, my attitudes on the right-hand side. It's nailed me perfectly. So that's to me sociographic profiling in a nutshell. And I would recommend everyone have a think about that, and also have a think about what communication methods and the way in which you work that would enable them to be part of your work moving forward. So to round out the presentation for this afternoon, I'd just like to share beyond me, back to my waitressing days, what I learned really quickly, seeing people order hot drinks and what that means in terms of the diversity being much more than their demographics. In the 1990s, instant coffee, definitely the simple living group. The sociographic profile matches them perfectly. When I read it, I went, yep, I know some people, absolutely, that I used to make mocha pan instant coffee for. A pot of tea, that's all your traditional lifers. And as I said, it doesn't matter if you're 20 or 70, you can still be a true traditionalist. You probably have similar beliefs to your mum. You know, if you're a young person in your 20s, you know, you probably really have stuck to the same beliefs as your parents and potentially your grandparents. You haven't moved far away from that generational pull. Independent families who are a bit look at me, you know, and are quite fashionable, want to be seen as fashionable, and make their own decisions. They might be a cappuccino. Well, these days they might even be a legend or a short macchiato or something like that. Coffee's moved a long way from the 90s. And that decaf soy latte person, I've never been one of those, but they are definitely the progressives. In the 2020s, coffee's very different. People are not, though. So I would leave you with that thought that demographics take you some of the way, but diversity is much more than demographics. So thank you very much, and I would really welcome questions of any types, comments, or I'll look forward to seeing what's been going on in the chat while I've been talking and not concentrating on the feedback. And because I can't see anybody's faces, I don't even know whether there's anyone there still. So this is going to be really interesting. So thanks very much for the opportunity to share something that I've sort of been evolving and brewing over the last couple of decades.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was, lots of great insights. And I was particularly, interested in the sociographic profiling. Like a couple of our participants, I think we had, there was, I think, Cynthia and somebody else who questioned, who's an adventurous tea drinker. I would also question that being a traditional life, seeing as there's such a variety of teas. And I'll give a quick plug to a fellow B Corp in Pucka. They've got some amazing teas. But we do have a few questions. One of Cynthia, who I mentioned, asked, how did you collect the data to develop the insight, and what methods did you use?
Yeah, so the sociographic profiles are developed in the same way as Roy Morgan's value segment. So there's social data collected online in focus groups, and it's done at a national and a state level. So there is representative samples and algorithms are built to actually look at it. Oh, can you still hear me? I've got strange messages.
Yes, yep.
Popping up. That's all right. It's asking me whether I want to leave the meeting. I certainly don't want to do that. I've lost my backdrop too. That's interesting. Sorry, I got a little distracted. So the data is collected at a range of levels, and then what is learned about people is applied to local neighbourhoods and areas. So there hasn't been a lot of local focus groups going on, or it's done at very large levels and then projected back on local neighbourhoods and communities.
And so how do people get the sociographic profiles for their own LGA, and what are the next steps? That's a question from Karina and Joe.
Well, certainly they've always been available, but they've been sort of at the behest of advertising agencies and used in different ways, really to sell people things, the psychographic. But the sociographic data is quite newly available, and I've been working up these profiles with a colleague, Don Sharples, and we've set up Populous Data so we can offer this at a really effective and efficient way that doesn't cost too much. Because if you went out and commissioned it yourself for one LGA, it may not fit within your project budget, but we've developed it in a way that can be rolled out to any LGA within a few days at a really cost-effective price.
Okay, and is there one available for the Melbourne LGA? Smita would like to know.
It's available for every LGA across Australia, because it's drawn on ABS census data with that other social data and market and focus group testing added.
Sorry, you go, Lisa.
No, that's fine. I was finished.
You mentioned the ABS data again, and Sarah also mentioned that it's woefully inadequate and questioned, what about the LGBTQI plus community?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is not a lot of data available at this point. Alongside the sociographic data, Populous Data is developing up a whole data dashboard around people, place, environment and economy for local councils to utilise, because data is critical to good decision making and good reporting and storytelling with the community, but we can only draw at this point on the data that's available. At this point, there's not a lot of good data around LGBTI communities, and it's something that if we get enough subscribers, we'll be certainly looking to commission research that fills some of those gaps. If we can do it together and get a collective of local communities interested, there are certainly some gaps in the public data that's available, and we'd love to try and fill them.
Yeah, and so if people would like that, do they just get in touch with you, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I have a question about the sociographic profiling. I didn't see where social media was mentioned as a channel for reaching people. Just wondering if and where you see that fitting in.
It certainly does. It definitely is part of. Just go to
one slide before.
So there, I'll go back to the grouping slides, and this has really been a work in progress. So whilst social media is not on there, except for Carefully Progressive, that is a real target for Carefully Progressive people, the Twitters and, Facebook users. But I think that's creeping in, and we'll be looking at how that features. It features across all of those cohorts most definitely, but certain groups rely on it more heavily than others. So online social issues campaigns. So yeah, that's your social media. Certainly Carefully Progressives are really strongly probably thinking a lot about the US election and various other social issues at the moment around what might be about to happen and how it will impact their lives. Beyond COVID, of course, everyone's over COVID, and, let's move on to the next big challenge.
We've got a question from Leah. Is there a way to use sociographic profiling for groups that aren't spatially organised in a town or LGA?
You can map it at any level. So you can certainly look to segment your communications, which might go universally in 4 different ways. So you might write different things and put them out differently. So it doesn't have to be spatially focused. It doesn't have to be based on those smaller neighbourhoods. It was just a way of us expressing the kind of most common type in particular neighbourhoods and linking that in helping people understand the community better. But certainly my recommendation would be that you can use the knowledge from the sociographic profiles to really target your communications and do a really great job of that to ensure you're capturing representation from all 4 areas. I'm not sure whether that answers the question, but I'm more than happy to take a call or an email from that person. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. We'll give her details to you. Deborah would like to know if the same 4 profiles are used across all communities, or are they different in different LGAs?
The 4 are the same across communities. It's just in different proportions. So the reason that some segmentation that's done at a national level doesn't work so well for local areas is if you tried to contrast, say, for example, Northcote with Warrnambool, that would mean that Warrnambool would have no progressive people. So if you go on a spectrum, you might end up with skewing the idea of what's there. We do it relative to each LGA. So those 4 are the 4 sort of personality types or values-based groupings that have been developed in the sociographic research. And it's done as relative to the LGA to ensure that we're really painting a picture about what that local community's type is like.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Well, we're just about out of time, so I want to say thank you again for joining us at the conference. We hope that you're able to get a lot out of Lisa's presentation, and as we said, if you've got any other questions, feel free to shoot them through. A highlight for me was probably the great insights that you have got, Lisa, working in hospitality, about people being either open or averse to change depending on the drink they ordered. I'd also encourage you to sign up for our newsletter if you would like a copy of this or any of the other sessions, because all of the videos from the conference will be published only via the email newsletter. So we'll put that link up in the chat as well. Head on over to the conference Facebook page, as I mentioned, where you can network and share your thoughts and ideas again. And tomorrow there is a walk and talk session with Jacob from Kapir, and he's going to walk you through the neighbourhood to do some community asset mapping and use audio, selfies and drawing. So it'll be a good chance to get away from Zoom and the CV screen and get out and enjoy the sunshine and nature. So hopefully you can join us there, and we'll see you again soon at Kapir.